Most people know Texas for the Bandidos, the red and gold patch, the Fat Mexican, a club that has controlled the state since 1966 and enforced that control with a ruthlessness that produced some of the most documented violence in American biker history. But the Bandidos are only the beginning of the story. Behind them are 4 other organizations whose stories most people have never heard, and one of them did not even come from biker culture at all. These are 5 things you did not know about Texas bikers. The Bandidos. Ask anyone where the Bandidos Motorcycle Club was founded, and the answer you will most likely hear is San Antonio, Texas. That answer has been repeated in newspaper articles, television documentaries, and law enforcement reports for decades. It is wrong. The Bandidos were founded in San Leon, Texas, a small fishing community sitting on the edge of Galveston Bay, approximately 30 miles southeast of Houston, where the roads are flat and the water is close. And the kind of men who worked the docks in 1966 had no particular interest in what the rest of the country thought about them. Donald Eugene Chambers was 36 years old when he founded the club on March 4, 1966. He was a Marine Corps veteran who had served in Vietnam and come home to work the docks at San Leon. The existing motorcycle clubs he encountered after his return struck him as too soft and too comfortable for men who had seen what he had seen. So he built his own. He recruited from biker bars along the Texas Gulf Coast, drawing early members from Houston, Galveston, Corpus Christi, and San Antonio. By the early 1970s, the club had over 100 members, many of them Vietnam veterans who added a roughness and a discipline to the organization that Chambers had been looking for from the beginning. The patch he designed told you everything about where his loyalties sat. The colors red and gold were taken directly from the United States Marine Corps' scarlet and gold. The Fat Mexican, the caricature of a sombrero-wearing bandit, holding a machete and a pistol that became one of the most recognizable patches in the outlaw motorcycle world, was designed by Chambers himself. And here is the detail that nobody in the club has ever officially explained. Most people who repeat the Bandidos' founding story include the claim that Chambers named the club after the Frito Bandito, the cartoon mascot of Frito's corn chips. The problem with that story is a simple one of timing. The Frito Bandito first appeared on American television screens in 1967. The Bandidos were founded in 1966. Chambers could not have named his club after a cartoon that did not exist yet. The resemblance between the Fat Mexican and the Frito Bandito is either a coincidence that got folded into the founding myth after the fact, or something nobody inside the club has chosen to clarify. Either way, the timeline does not work, and the story has been repeated as fact for 60 years regardless. But the founding myth is not the most important thing Chambers left behind. In 1972, 6 years after he founded the club on the San Leon docks, Chambers was convicted of murder in El Paso, Texas. He had taken 2 drug dealers who had crossed the Bandidos out into the desert, made them dig their own graves, and burned them alive. The man who had built the club was convicted of one of the most brutal killings in Texas criminal history before the organization he had founded was even a decade old. That detail does not appear in most accounts of the Bandidos' founding story, but it explains more about the culture Chambers built in San Leon than any founding myth ever could. What is not in dispute is what the Bandidos became. Today, the club has 303 chapters in 22 countries. Their mother chapter sits in Houston, Texas. The Bandidos are the dominant outlaw motorcycle organization across Texas, and they enforce that dominance through a rule that has produced some of the most significant biker conflicts in the state's history. No other outlaw motorcycle club is permitted to wear a Texas bottom rocker without the Bandidos' explicit permission. That rule is not a suggestion. It is the foundation of the territorial structure that the Bandidos have maintained across the state since 1966. And when another Texas club decided to put that bottom rocker on their back without asking, the consequences played out in a restaurant parking lot in Waco on a Sunday afternoon in May 2015. 9 bikers were killed. 20 were wounded. 177 people were arrested. It was the deadliest biker shootout in American history. And when the legal process that followed finally concluded 4 years later, not a single person had been convicted of anything. That is what the Bandidos' bottom rocker rule looks like when someone decides to test it. The Twin Peaks shootout, the deadliest biker confrontation in American history, ended with 0 convictions on the morning of May 17, 2015. The parking lot of a Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco, Texas, was filling up with motorcycles. The meeting that had been called there was not a criminal gathering. It was a political organizing meeting hosted by the Texas Confederation of Clubs and Independents, a statewide coalition that lobbied for motorcyclist rights. The agenda that day involved legislative issues around motorcycle registration and helmet laws. Some of the people who drove to that parking lot did not even ride motorcycles. One woman who attended told reporters she and her husband had driven a car from Brenham because it was expected to rain. But underneath the political agenda, a territorial dispute had been building for months between the 2 largest motorcycle clubs in Texas. The Bandidos had controlled the state since 1966, and their control included the right to determine who could wear a Texas bottom rocker. The Cossacks, a Tyler, Texas club founded in 1969 that had never expanded outside the state, had recently started wearing a Texas bottom rocker without Bandidos' permission. The Bandidos had been demanding they remove it. The Cossacks had refused. Both clubs showed up to that parking lot in Waco knowing exactly what the other had been doing, and neither side had any intention of backing down. The Cossacks arrived over an hour before the scheduled 1 o'clock meeting and took over the patio area that had been reserved for the gathering. Waco police were already there. 18 officers from the Waco Police Department and 4 Texas Highway Patrol troopers had positioned themselves around the perimeter before the meeting began. Law enforcement had been monitoring motorcycle club activity at the Twin Peaks for weeks and had cameras rolling before the first bike pulled into the lot. What happened next lasted approximately 2 minutes. An argument between a Bandido and a Cossack in the parking lot turned to fists. Fists turned to gunfire. Terrified families eating Sunday lunch inside the restaurant dove under tables and scrambled toward exits as the shooting erupted outside. By the time it stopped, 9 bikers were dead, and 20 others had been seriously wounded. Dozens of guns and knives were left scattered across the parking lot as men fled in every direction. Then, the arrests began. Waco police and the McLennan County District Attorney made a decision that would define the legal aftermath of the shootout for the next 4 years. Anyone wearing Bandidos or Cossacks colors was going to jail. Not anyone who had been seen shooting. Not anyone who had been identified as a combatant. Anyone wearing the patch. 177 people were arrested that afternoon and bused to the Waco Convention Center for processing. Every single one of them was charged with the identical offense. Engaging in organized criminal activity, every single one of them was held on a $1 million bond. The problems with that approach became apparent almost immediately. Evidence had been mishandled. Weapons had been collected without gloves, making it impossible to guarantee that the last person to fire a particular gun was its owner. The mass arrest had swept up people who had arrived after the shooting was already over. It had swept up people with no criminal records and no involvement in the confrontation. And an Associated Press investigation later established that 4 of the 9 men who died had been killed by police bullets, not by other bikers. Of the 177 people arrested, 155 were indicted. Of those 155, only 1 person ever went to trial. Dallas Bandidos chapter president Jake Carazal, whose case became less a trial about what happened in that parking lot, and more an attempt by prosecutors to put the Bandidos Motorcycle Club itself on trial. The jury deadlocked. A mistrial was declared. The county had spent $1.3 million preparing the cases. In April 2019, the newly elected district attorney dismissed every remaining charge. 9 people dead on a Sunday afternoon in a public restaurant parking lot in Waco, Texas. 0 convictions. Not a misdemeanor, not a plea deal, nothing. 130 federal civil rights lawsuits were subsequently filed by arrested bikers against the former district attorney, the former police chief, the city of Waco, and the officers involved. Houston attorney Paul Looney, who represented 6 of the bikers, described the outcome directly. "We had an open shootout in broad daylight at a public restaurant in the middle of May on a Sunday afternoon, leaving 9 dead and over 20 wounded, and nobody was even convicted of a misdemeanor. That is an unacceptable result in our American justice system. The deadliest biker shootout in American history happened because one Texas club decided to put a patch on their back that another Texas club said they had no right to wear. The legal system that was supposed to answer for it produced nothing, and the bottom rocker that started it all is still being worn by the Cossacks today. The Cossacks, most people who know the name Cossacks Motorcycle Club know it because of Waco, the parking lot, the shooting, the 9 dead. But the story of how a motorcycle club founded in Tyler, Texas in 1969 ended up in the deadliest biker confrontation in American history starts long before May 2015, and it starts with a decision that anyone who understands the 1%er world would recognize immediately as either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily reckless, depending on which side of that parking lot you were standing on. The Cossacks were founded in Tyler, Texas in 1969. In the 56 years since that founding, they have never opened a chapter outside Texas. No expansion into neighboring states, no international chapters, no national footprint. They are a Texas club in the most literal sense of the term. Their entire identity is rooted in the state, and that rootedness is precisely what made the bottom rocker dispute with the Bandidos so significant. The Cossacks were not an outside organization trying to move into Bandidos territory. They were a club that had been operating inside that territory for decades, and that had spent those decades doing what every other club in Texas did, acknowledging that the Bandidos owned the state and operating accordingly. For years, the Cossacks rode without a Texas bottom rocker. The Bandidos controlled that designation, and the Cossacks accepted it the way every other club in the state accepted it. Not because they were weak, but because the alternative was a war with the most powerful outlaw motorcycle organization in Texas, and nobody who understood what that meant was in a hurry to start one. But in the years leading up to 2015, something changed. The Cossacks began wearing a Texas bottom rocker without Bandidos' permission. The decision was not made quietly or accidentally. It was a deliberate statement that the Cossacks considered themselves a Texas club in every sense of that designation, and that they were no longer willing to ride in a state they had called home since 1969 without the patch that reflected that reality. The Bandidos responded with demands that they remove it. The Cossacks refused. The escalation that followed produced a series of confrontations across the state that built steadily toward something neither side could walk back from. By the time both clubs arrived at the Twin Peaks parking lot in Waco on May 17, 2015, the tension had been building for long enough that the outcome was not entirely surprising to anyone paying attention. What was surprising was the scale of it. Testimony from Dallas Bandidos chapter president Jake Carrizal described the Cossacks arriving at the Twin Peaks with bulletproof vests already on. 6 of the 9 men who died in that parking lot were Cossacks. 1 was a Bandido. 1 belonged to another club. 1 had no club affiliation at all. The Cossacks never recanted. They never removed the Texas bottom rocker. They were in the parking lot in Waco because they refused to back down from a decision they had made, and they paid a price for that refusal that no other Texas motorcycle club has paid in the modern era. But the patch is still on their back. The club that started in Tyler in 1969 and never left Texas is still operating in the state that the Bandidos have controlled since 1966. And the bottom rocker that 9 people died over is still being worn. That stubbornness is either the most Texas thing about the Cossacks or the most reckless. Depending on who you ask, the answer changes. But in a state where the biker world has always operated on the principle that territory is defended and disrespect has consequences, the Cossacks made a decision that the Bandidos could not ignore, and did not. The parking lot in Waco is what happens when 2 Texas clubs both decide they are right, and neither one is willing to be the first to say otherwise. The Homietos. Every motorcycle club traces its origin to the same basic story. Veterans who came home from war looking for brotherhood. Riders who wanted to ride together and built a club around it. Men who loved motorcycles and created an organization that reflected that love, even if what it became was something far darker than what it started as. The Homietos Motorcycle Club does not fit that story, not even slightly. The Homietos were founded in 2015 in Houston, Texas. They were not founded by veterans or riders or men who had grown up in motorcycle culture and wanted to build something within it. According to federal prosecutors who spent years investigating the organization, the Homietos grew directly out of the Tango Blast prison gang. Tango Blast is one of the largest prison gangs in Texas, with thousands of members spread across the state's correctional facilities. When members got out, they needed a structure to operate within on the outside. The Homietos provided that structure. They put on patches and called themselves a motorcycle club. The motorcycle came second. The organizational model imported from inside a Texas prison came first. Federal indictments documented that the Homietos recruited members who were predominantly convicted felons, a large number of whom were current or former Houston Tango Blast members. The chain of command that ran the club, the enforcement of rules, the punishment of members who stepped out of line, and the rewarding of violence as a way of building status within the organization were all frameworks that the founding membership already knew from their time inside. They had not learned how to run a criminal organization by joining a motorcycle club. They had learned it in Texas prisons and then applied it to a motorcycle club when they got out. That origin makes the Homietos genuinely different from every other club and from almost every other outlaw motorcycle club in America. The Bandidos were built by a Marine who found civilian life insufficient. The Cossacks were built by Texas riders who wanted their own organization. The Homietos were built by men who had spent time in the Texas prison system and who understood exactly how a hierarchy operates when violence is the primary enforcement mechanism. The conflict that put the Homietos on the map in Texas biker culture was their war with the Bandidos. In April 2022, 3 Homietos members, including their club president Christopher Holt and vice president Mahir Ali Hodizic, were arrested after shooting across Interstate 45 at Bandidos members from a gas station in Madisonville, Texas. The shooting happened in broad daylight on a public highway. A bystander reported their vehicle was struck by a bullet during the exchange. Then, in April 2023, the conflict escalated into something that made national news. 4 Bandidos members were shot on Interstate 45 40 miles apart from each other in what federal prosecutors described as a coordinated retaliatory attack. 3 of the 4 died. The shooting followed a brawl and shootout between the 2 clubs at a bar called the Whiskey Barrel in Oklahoma City. The Homietos had taken a local Houston dispute and carried it across state lines into Oklahoma, and then brought the retaliation back to a Texas highway. In March 2026, a federal grand jury returned a superseding indictment against 17 alleged Homietos members and associates on charges including racketeering conspiracy, racketeering murder, attempted murder, assault, and firearms offenses. The indictment detailed multiple shootings going back to 2020, including the April 2023 highway killings. FBI Special Agent in Charge Jason Hudson of the Houston Field Office stated at the time of the arrests that the Homietos outlaw motorcycle gang is no more. A club founded in Houston in 2015 by men who learned organizational structure inside a Texas prison had within a decade produced a federal RICO case, 3 dead Bandidos on an interstate highway, and a law enforcement response that the FBI described as dismantling the organization entirely. The Tango Blast model that the Homietos imported from the prison system turned out to be effective enough to make them one of the most significant criminal motorcycle organizations in Texas in under 10 years, and dangerous enough to make them a federal priority within the same time frame. Beast Channelview, Texas, is a small unincorporated community on the eastern edge of Houston. It sits alongside the Houston Ship Channel, and most people who drive through it on their way to somewhere else do not give it a second thought. Around 2015, a motorcycle club called Brothers East started operating there. They called themselves B*East. They had approximately 200 members. They had been operating for less than a decade when the Bandidos Motorcycle Club decided they needed to be destroyed. That decision tells you more about B*East than anything else in their documented history. The Bandidos have 303 chapters in 22 countries. They have controlled Texas biker territory since 1966. They have fought wars with the Hells Angels, the Cossacks, and clubs across 4 continents. When an organization with that kind of history and that kind of reach issues a standing order to assault or kill members of a 200-person club from a Houston suburb on sight, It is because that club has done something significant enough to demand that level of response. The conflict between the Bandidos and Beast produced documented violence that ran across the Houston area for several years. In November 2021, 26-year-old Beast member Michael Zimbrich was riding on an Interstate 10-feeder road in Houston when an SUV pulled alongside him and someone inside shot him dead. Federal prosecutors later charged David Vargas, a Bandidos associate, with the murder. The state case against Vargas was dismissed in May 2023 when a witness went missing. The federal racketeering case that followed was not so easily dismissed. In June 2023, a Bandidos member named Stephen Alms shot a Beast member 7 times on a Houston street after pulling up alongside him in a Ford F-150. Alms later pleaded guilty to RICO conspiracy and illegal firearm possession. The shooting was one of the acts cited in a 31-page federal indictment, unsealed in 2023, that charged 14 Bandidos members and associates with racketeering conspiracy, murder, attempted murder, arson, robbery, and assault. The indictment documented that the Bandidos' national leadership had issued a standing order described in the charging documents as smash on sight. The instruction to Bandidos members across Houston was to assault or kill any Beast member they encountered. The Bandidos were not trying to negotiate with Beast, or warn them or give them an opportunity to stand down. They had decided Beast needed to be eliminated, and they were working through their membership to accomplish that. United States Attorney Nicholas Ganjay described the Bandidos' strategy in plain terms. At the time, the indictment was unsealed. The Bandidos, he said, sought to establish a monopoly over motorcycle clubs and gangs in the Houston area, with only those approved by them permitted to operate. Beast had not been approved, and the response to that lack of approval was a federal racketeering case that named 14 defendants and documented years of organized violence directed at a club from Channelview that most people outside Houston had never heard of. The Beast story did not end with the Bandidos' indictment. The club's own president, Michael Cupp, was separately indicted in Jefferson County on human trafficking charges, including promotion of prostitution. The organization that the Bandidos had been trying to destroy through a shoot-on-sight order was simultaneously being investigated by local prosecutors for crimes that had nothing to do with the Bandidos' war. Beast started in a Houston suburb around 2015 with 200 members and no national profile. Within a decade, they had been targeted by a standing shoot-on-sight order from the most powerful outlaw motorcycle organization in Texas, produced a federal RICO case against 14 of their rivals, and had their own president indicted on human trafficking charges. In the Texas biker world, where the measure of a club's significance is often determined by the quality of the enemies it makes, Beast made enemies at the highest level available. Whether that constitutes success or failure in the 1%er world depends entirely on the standard you are applying. But it is not the story that anyone watching a small club start up in Channelview in 2015 would have predicted was coming. Texas produced the birthplace of the Bandidos, a shootout that killed 9 people, and convicted Nobody, a prison gang that put on patches and declared itself a motorcycle club and a 200-member club from a Houston suburb that ended up in a federal war with the most powerful organization in the state. If you want to see what one man operating inside that same outlaw world looked like when he decided to take on the Hells Angels personally, click the next video.